Okay, so the Four Pillars podcast. Today we have Lewi Holcombe from, I'm going to say Sydney. Please don't be wrong.
Close enough.
Yeah, close enough to Sydney, Australia. 1/3 of the ROBUR strength and performance team from out in the Australian side of things. So we're going to be talking today specifically about CrossFit. It may grow some arms and legs, but for now, dude, just introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about your background, where you're from, what you do, your business, and your current status and all that kind of stuff, man.
Yeah, first off, man, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. I always like to hear the sound of my own voice and talk about the things I love. So I never turned down an opportunity to do so. But I guess to give a little bit of background around myself, I started training, I'm going to say when I was around high school. Then I kind of went down a bit of a dodgy route with some friends and, life got a little bit crazy for a little bit. And then around the age of 20, I joined the army. Where I got really deep into physical training, being a great soldier. I wanted to go down the route of special forces, so trained very, very hard and made a lot of, mistakes when it came to training, like we all do when we kind of first dive into it. And then kind of found the love of CrossFit because it was a lot of things at the time that I loved doing was just working really, really hard. Like I guess a lot of us do, sweating our ass off. I'm allowed to swear, right? That's all good.
Yeah, man, I fucking swear all the fuck you want.
Sweet. So yeah, pushing myself to the limit, seeing what my body's capable of, all those good things, which I guess we can talk about a little bit later, did build a little bit of a poor relationship with training and myself, but won't digress too much into that. So I guess that was probably around 2014 when I sort of found CrossFit. So it's been, I don't know, whatever that is, however many years. And from there, I just continued to push in the sport. And then I got a couple of bad injuries through work, which put a bit of a spanner in the works to say my goals of achieving anything within the sport itself. And that kind of pushed me into a physio role with the guys I was working with at the time. And I learned a lot off them when it came to rehabilitation through all the things that I had going on. And it really piqued my interest in coaching and educating and learning as much as I could about, this process and not necessarily what I did wrong, but how I could do a lot of things better in the future. And that then led me into my role now, which I am within Defence as a physical training instructor in the Army. So I take currently the new recruits for Army and PT and also working into the work hardening space. So I take a lot of late stage rehab guys, retrain them up back to their fighting fit role, so to speak. And then on the outside of that, I obviously have the business ROBUR Performance, which I run with Aiden and Dennis. And I'm probably more the guy that works with the CrossFit athletes and the concurrent guys, because that's kind of where my passion and my love is. And a lot of it is around taking not necessarily the best approach, because none of us really know the best approach, but maybe an approach that's a little bit more intelligent to what might be given to the masses currently, or to, I guess, take them down a more intelligent path than going down the one that I kind of did when I started, and helping people build a healthier relationship with training, not necessarily just this relationship that I had myself at the start, which was I need to beat myself down every day. So I guess it's kind of been a constant evolution, and that evolution is still going to keep going. But so to speak of it now, I'd like to look at myself mainly with the CrossFit guys I work with, more performance side things for CrossFit. So most of the athletes I do work with are pushing a higher level of the sport. And then the other guys I work with a lot more concurrent training and strength training bias, things like that. The main reason I kind of probably only work with the guys that are more tailored around they want to perform within the sport is just because the sport itself, as you probably know, and those listening, entails so damn much in terms of like skill. So getting someone in an online program where I do a lot of, skill work, look at technique, things like that, you can only do so much online. Whereas if someone's quite new to the sport, it's always probably going to be better when you're going to have someone face to face and you can work with them. So that's why I tend to work more on the side of performance with those guys trying to push the upper limits who already have quite of a handle in the skills. And then I help them dive deeper into the whole, physiological side and taking a little bit of a smarter approach to really pushing their 1% of their performance they still need to squeeze out for competition. That being said, that doesn't kind of rule out those other people. I'll always be there to help them. And if I can't help them, or I don't think I should be the one helping them being in that online space, I'm always going to direct them to somewhere I believe is going to be more beneficial for them. A little bit of a tangent there, but I guess that's starting of an introduction to myself, man.
No, I love that. All of it. I love it. Do you have a lot of guys competing?
Currently, I've got on my CrossFit roster about 5 athletes, and that's also my spots on taking. A lot of them are currently closed just because of the amount of effort I believe I put into my CrossFit athletes. It's just time, very, very time consuming with everything else we're trying to push at the moment with the business.
Yeah, man, absolutely love that. Sounds like you got a hell of a lot going on. What about yourself? Have you got like have you competed in the past? Has that been something that you've been doing as well?
Yeah, I've competed a little bit. Nothing like world stage or anything like that, but I've competed in a few competitions around the areas where I used to live in Queensland and then down here. And I've also competed at the Torian Pro in teams a couple of years ago, which is the national, I guess, competition. And so that does obviously give me, because I'm a big believer of, you have to have, yes, you have to have the knowledge around what you're giving people, but obviously that experience in what competition in general is like, how, just being a human and you react to certain things on certain days. So having both sides of the fence is obviously going to be just as important than having one. It's kind of like, you probably wouldn't go to a coach who's never done anything in terms of the sport that they're coaching. Same as you'd probably never go to the athlete just because they're a really great athlete doesn't necessarily mean they're also going to make a great coach. So it's kind of that happy medium. And that's also another reason why I decided to sort of step away a little bit. It was more, I'd really want to invest more time into coaching my guys than necessarily worrying about myself, because that's probably one of the biggest things with the sport being, it's got so much going on. The volume you actually have to put in to get anywhere with it is a lot on the body, is a lot on the, the fatigue mentally as well. So trying to do that as well as business, coaching my guys, it wasn't working. I pushed it last year a fair bit. And at the start of this year, it was just, I started to slip business wise. I was just falling behind on coaching, things like that. And then also, the other 2 lads I work with. So it came to that point where I had to trim some fat and, the training wasn't at the top of the priority list.
Yeah, man, I think something that we see with our business as well is we have the remedial side as well. So Marta takes care of a lot of the massage therapy, and as like a remedial care specialist in program design myself, I guess, and we get a lot of people coming through who are like CrossFitters, and CrossFit's massive in Glasgow. We've got quite a lot of good clubs here, and something that I like as well, and something that I've used in my own training in the past too. But when we get these people coming in and they're injured, it makes me question some of the program design that goes into how they do things specifically. And one thing you mentioned there was like this intelligent training process towards like CrossFit. And something that if you do follow, if anyone's listening to this, and they will be following ROBUR themselves, that you guys are pretty intelligent guys. Like the way I like what you do, because there's a specific element of understanding towards how to prioritize the programs, how to mitigate long-term issues before you get sort of both feet in the water, essentially, with all the modalities that you're using. So when it comes to like program design, and when it comes to intelligent program design itself, like how do you step into that? Because like when I see these people come into my gym and they're injured, and it's usually rotator cuff tears, and it's stuff to do with lower back problems, and it's usually stuff to do with hip problems and bone spurs and all this other stuff, from just like not really understanding positions that they should be in, which they're going to be exposed to over and over again. And how do you then start to look at the programming going into CrossFit? Because also understand that some of the qualifications that you need to get into CrossFit aren't really that difficult, and they don't really cover that much from what I've seen. So what are some of your thoughts around that stuff?
Oof, all right.
Yeah. I'll shut up now for the next hour. Let's go.
So I guess to begin with, the first thing I like to establish, and it's probably very similar to the process that I'd say you would take, is if that person comes to me and they're like, what does an intelligent program look like? I guess the first thing I want to understand is, what's your relationship like with your training? Because especially when it comes to CrossFitters, they've been exposed, like their first exposure to a CrossFit class is like, these are the movements, go do them as hard as you can until you feel absolutely fucked and you can't get up off the floor. And then you're going to come back and do the same thing tomorrow. And then you're going to come back and do the same thing tomorrow.
Yeah.
And after you do that for a while, you kind of, you start to feel a little bit guilty when you miss those sessions. You're like, I didn't work hard enough, or I missed this session today. And then you do see a trend of, I missed yesterday, so I'm going to do 2 sessions today to make up for that. And it's like, you and I both know that's not necessarily how things work. So I think the first thing usually is trying to formulate a base understanding of how this person sees training. And once you understand that, cool, if they want a whole bunch of high intensity, they want to work really, really hard, I can give that to them, because straight away, we're not going to change it. We're not going to, go, no, you're not doing that because this is the better way to do things. Because straight off the bat, you're going to lose them. They're not going to have any buy-in to what you're doing because it's not meeting them halfway. But from understanding that, we can now go, okay, cool. They're going to want a lot of volume. They're going to want to feel like they've beaten themselves up every day. So I'm going to have to create this program to kind of emulate that and give them that. But I'm kind of sleight of handing and hiding that they're not getting that. And that's usually through exercise selection, the complexity of what you're giving them. So that's probably the biggest thing I'd say to begin with, is just sort of understanding where they're at mentally when it comes to pushing. And that's going to really start off your prescription of how much you're going to give them. And then also how you're going to frame what you're giving them in terms of complexity, because that's going to have a massive effect on the actual fatigue that comes from it. And that fatigue is usually the biggest downfall to everyone, because I like to think of it this way. It's like we train, or we think we train 100% every day. We can't ever express that. We're probably stuck at that 75% mark every day because we never actually get enough rest to push to that 100% and expose ourselves to that 100%. And then we also obviously never go back down to like that 50% where we need to rest. So establishing that baseline of that person's relationship, I think, is the best starting point. From there, the next thing is just figuring out how this person moves. Where are their limiters or their rate limiting factors? Usually it comes down to, from what I see, as you said earlier, finding certain positions, because a lot of the time that's never really, I guess, it's a lot better now than what it used to be, at least in Australia, when it comes to technique, skill development, things like that. But everyone wants to get the fastest score. And we obviously know when we start pushing the limits when it comes to max effort intensity, the first thing that's going to happen is we get to a point of failure and we're going to compensate. And then we just build these crazy compensation patterns, and they're not necessarily bad, but over a period of time, they can compound into other things that we don't necessarily want to have, or that aren't necessarily conducive to performance. They might get you there, but they're probably not going to get you there in the fastest manner. So that's probably where I'd first start, is obviously relationship with training. And then I move into looking at where are they at when it comes to, how they move, what their skills are like, how do they breathe? That's also a really big one. And then from there, I'll do like some sort of intensity profiling, where I'll look at them on a spectrum of what I like to call a spectrum of muscle tension. And that's just an archetype of looking at someone who is either holds a lot of muscle tension. So we could say someone like a very powerful athlete or a bodybuilder, a very anaerobic posture, if we want to call it like that. Or on the other side of the spectrum, are they very low muscle tension? So they're more of that aerobic posture. They're that aerobic style athlete. Because once we kind of figure out either side of those spectrums, then we kind of got to bring them usually to that center of balance. And the ways to kind of bring them into that center of balance aren't necessarily that difficult. But the difficult part is obviously figuring out all those skills around it that you need to also fit in while you bring them back to that point of balance.
That's awesome, man. I actually not answered the question, but you kind of went into something I was going to ask there. Because like when we look at CrossFit in general, and I love it, and I will watch, I watch the CrossFit games. I follow enough CrossFitters online, always gets you hyped up, right? Always gets you hyped up. And all of the CrossFitters I know here, they're always hyped up. They're always like quite highly strung people. They need to go in. They don't necessarily enjoy it sometimes, but they need to go in. I think if we look at someone like Dennis, who's going to be powerlifting, like he's never competing till he competes on the day. But even if you're a non-competitive CrossFitter, you're always competing in some realm as well. So it keeps you in that really kind of stressful threshold all the time. And then when I start looking at kind of like volume comparisons as well, like I know me as who I am. I train by myself in my gym. I don't do any sort of club work. I just like to be like that introverted guy that can just train on his own. I don't need that commitment to a gym because I don't need to feel like I need to have other people to make me push myself harder. But I know my volume intensities. Like I know for a fact that if I go into 3x6 at like 85-90% of like say what I need to be doing, then I'm going to be hurting. My central nervous system starts to break down over time. I just feel like dog shit. So when I go into stuff like CrossFit and I think about how that may look on me. I really need to start to understand, well, where does my volume sit? Like, because I'm not going to be able to push specific volume within a certain area of CrossFit because I'm just going to break down really, really fucking quickly. Whereas someone else might be able to push a hell of a lot more volume. But then when we look at these standardized programs, like this is exercise, whatever it might be, Mary or Janet or Caroline. I don't know. I'm just pulling stupid names out right now, but
they're probably
you see where I'm going with this. It's
yeah.
kind of like, it tells me like, well, if I have to do that at that specific volume, that may not be good for me. So where does that then fit into CrossFit? If I wanted to come into CrossFit, but I already know where my volume lies, I already know how well my body reacts, recovers, within certain realms of training, and then how I can prioritize whether it might be percentages or RIR, stuff like that within my program. How would you then take that information and plug that into a setup on a person specific and program whilst they're still training in an environment of people where it may be like a club where there's multiple tasks going on at one time?
Yeah. So that's, so are you kind of asking, if you're on like an individual program, how are you now going to work at that gym, or are you trying to do both?
Well, I guess I see it as like, if I'm going to be going into a gym and there's going to be other people training, they're all going to be doing the same thing, right? But if we're all doing the same thing and the intensities are already chosen for you, but you know that at specific intensity, you're not going to work well, then how do you get around that? Do you just start training by yourself, or do you then, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, of course. And most of the guys I do work with don't necessarily they don't really jump in on the classes, but usually that'll just come down to, hopefully the coach there on the floor is good at their job. And I'd say, again, I can't really put a number on, however, but let's just say, I'm going to say like a solid 60 to 70% of the coaches that I've seen in CrossFit gyms, again, most of them are only working within their current skill level, and most of them have got a CrossFit level 1, which, as you said earlier, is pretty basic. So they're kind of doing the best they can with the tools they've got, and it is 10,000 times better than what it was 10 years ago. But it is really up to that coach to be able to look at that person and be like, no, you're not doing that. Here's this, and have some way to scale it for them so they can, work within that session within their own ability. And that's probably where you do see that other, 30 to 40% that are just very good encouragers and not very good coaches. So they're really good at, let's go, work harder, be fast. But, they might see that person like, it looks pretty dodgy, but I don't know how to fix that. I don't have the tools in my toolbox to fix that. So that's where you do see a few issues come up. Having said that, I haven't seen it much over the past couple of years compared to where it was. It is getting a lot better. But I definitely think it comes around the education side of things. And it's really about educating the athletes that you have or that you're working with in a class environment about understanding how their body's feeling and what that means. And if something doesn't necessarily look like it should, then that's completely okay. But that might just mean we need to change a few things and get worse before we get better, so to speak. And that's really about creating that positive mindset that it's okay to not be here. It's completely fine to not be at that top level. And 99% of us aren't. And it's just about accepting that that is an okay thing to be, and that taking a little bit of a step back is going to be more beneficial for yourself to then eventually get to that 99% if that's where you want to be. And also making that separation that we're not the tier 2 me's or the Matt Frasers or the CrossFit Games athletes that you see at the games. So why would we try and emulate that? It's like you don't go to your local footy club and walk out on the ground and expect to be, the greatest footy player alive. It's like, where you're at. So it should be no different. But for some reason, CrossFit's not necessarily there yet. And it's still this go in there, beat yourself up, feel, cook yourself, leave, come back to it again. And again, that's not all of them. That's not everyone, but it is a trend that is kind of, or what's the word? It's a reference that most people use when they think about CrossFit. They think, yep, go in, beat yourself up. Someone's going to get a torn labrum or something like that. And then they're going to go, CrossFit's paid the, physios of the world's bills for the last 10 years. It's kind of the reception it gets from most other people. But I think a lot of it is just, it's a young sport. There's lack of education around a lot of different things. And then when it comes to, I think the big issue you touched on before was you go into the class, there might be Isabel or some, workout that has a set number and a set number of whether it's a 60 kilo snatch for a male and a 42 kilo snatch for a female, what people forget is these numbers that are on these workouts that have been prescribed by CrossFit or by the games or by some affiliate program, they're complete arbitrary numbers that were made up to make it work logistically on a competition floor. It's like, they're not numbers relative to anyone. They're just like, holy shit, how do we make, 30 people in a stadium snatch in a workout at the same time? Okay, well, it's going to be really easy to get a whole bunch of 20 kilo or 45 pound plates, or it's going to be easy to get a whole bunch of 25 pound or 10 kilo plates to make that work. So those set weights aren't actually relative to anyone. They're just arbitrary numbers that CrossFit selected because it was logistically feasible at the time. And then they kind of stuck there. So that doesn't mean you have to work there all the time. RPEs, percentages, RIRs, all those things in a sport that is so damn, variable in terms of all the different inputs that are coming, auto regulation is the only way to go. So it's just understanding that those numbers are arbitrary and it's okay to select different numbers.
Absolutely love that, man. And I think, why do you think then there's such this sliding scale? Because we have like people like CrossFit will either be completely demonized or it's the most important thing on the planet. And I rarely see anything down the middle. I used to do, I don't know if we would class it as like polarized training, and it was a bit more kind of variable in a way that I would go in and do a lot of strength. I would, like, twice a week I'll be doing a lot of strength work, and then twice a week I'll be going and working speed and power, and then adding in some kind of CrossFit based training at the back end of the day just to sort of experience that. But why do you think that sliding scale is so big? Why do you think CrossFit gets such a bad name at one side, and why do you think it's like blown up to be this huge entity on the other side?
I think it's young. So I think in terms of sports, it's pretty young. I'm sure, let's like take any sport that's been around for 50 or 100 years. And let's say the most common sport at the time is, let's say it's cricket or something. And then some guy comes along and goes, hey, why don't we like put this ball on the ground and start kicking it and trying to kick it in the goals? You're obviously going to have a huge camp of people on one side going, no, that's crap. Bro. We've got this one here already. This is the right way to do things. This isn't the right way to do things. It's completely incorrect. And, you're only just going to get injured, and all those things happen. And that's just perception that's going to be around for a fair few years while something's new. I guess if we're talking to coaches, you could kind of compare it to, 100 years ago, we didn't have racks to conduct back squats. So what they would do was they'd do like a Steinborn squat. So they'd pick it up off the ground, put it on their back and squat it. Whereas now, if someone was to go to a Steinborn squat in a gym, everyone would be like, oh, you're going to hurt yourself. That's the worst way to do it ever. And it's like, no, it's just because it's new to you. You don't know that. But they were doing that years and years ago, and they were fine. It's just now we're kind of at this point where this is what's acceptable and this is the norm and this is what's okay. And what we're not used to is kind of what we're going to attack. I guess that's what I'd say is on the side against. It's just a lack of understanding. And probably that first 5 years of when CrossFit was known for injuring a lot of people, it had a kind of a overarching systemic effect that has kind of hung around like a bad smell for a while. And I guess we could kind of still look at, there is statistics out there of like CrossFit injuries compared to like rugby injuries, and rugby destroys it 10 times out of 10 of the amount of injuries, but no one really thinks about that because it wasn't posted all over social media or it's not in your face on TV. The other side of things where it's like people that are, in the side of the sport that are kind of like everything else is, garbage or whatever. I think, again, it's also a lack of understanding. They've been in this, they've been exposed to this CrossFit thing. And one thing CrossFit's very, very good at is getting results really fucking quickly. Because it does. Whether they're, let's say, setting someone up for success long-term, maybe not, but we live in a world of where instant gratification is king, right? It's like, we want results, we want them now. And if you go into a gym and you bust your ass for a month straight, 7 days a week, a couple of things are either going to happen. You're either going to, get relatively competent at all the different things that you're doing, or maybe you're going to push a little bit too hard and get a niggle or two. But most of the time that the competency comes, and because there's so many different skills that people haven't touched, when it's like snatching, cleaning, handstand, walking, pull-ups, whatever it might be, it's just like boom, 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 boom. They're just getting these dopamine hits every single day of the week because they're ticking off all these boxes of these tasks. So now it's just like, holy shit, this sport has given me so much. I'm so confident in the way my body moves. I've lost a few kilos. I've never been fitter in my life. Why the fuck are all these people attacking it? Fuck them. So then you kind of get these two camps. Is because it's the camp on one side that hasn't got the understanding, but then it's the camp on the other side that it's like they've built their identity on this thing that has got them so many positive results, and now someone's attacking it.
Mate, like I say, it's perfect there, man. It's that scarcity mindset every time. Like I fucking love it. I just think I don't see a lot of CrossFitters who've doing it a long time with terrible body composition issues, or they, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just such like, there's just this element of like volume, intensity, frequency that just plows you into a position where you're going to get great results quick off the bat. And another thing you said there is sport. You're not exercising, you're not training, it's a sport. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many different arms and legs to what you're doing. You put someone in a gym environment, stick them on machines, teach them how to do a dumbbell press, take them through a sort of, you know, very early stage of training, which is kind of what I do as well. And when we get clients through the doors, I have to go through all these base level elements just to get them up towards like the barbell work later on. But that's easy for a lot of people because it's slow, it's steady. There's maybe 2 or 3 skill exercises throughout the week that they may need to worry about. But you enter into the realm of CrossFit, suddenly there's like 15 to 20 skill-based exercises that you may be doing over a 5-day plan. And I think just because of that, and when we see skill being like this primary motivator of motivation, like, it's what keeps us going. Like, it's no wonder that CrossFit has such great turnaround when it comes to like developing really good results. And I just feel like the scarcity mindset with a lot of people, they don't know it, they don't understand it, they don't do it. So they will break it down as quickly as they can. And then they'll start to compare it to stuff like bodybuilding. But even when you go down the route of bodybuilding, just look at the amount of injuries that I see every single week from that as well. Bicep tears, shoulder tears, you know what I mean? Like lower back problems, it's all the same shit. And I don't think it's evidently anything to do with the sport specifically or the training specifically, just more to the understanding of how to do it correctly. And I think if we had like what you said there, like different elements between what is a coach and what is just like a gym instructor, someone who's just going to take your hand and take you from machine to machine and just count your fucking reps, as to someone who's actually going to sit you down and teach you the functionality between each and every other exercise, is the massive differential there. So how would you look at then sort of understanding the entry levels of coming into CrossFit and like the sort of the qualifications that you need? Does any of that need to change? Like, how would you like to see things changing over the next few years with that? Should there be like a higher level coming in? You know what I'm saying?
Oh, that's a hard one, because it's like, in general, I have like the lowest level of CrossFit qualification, and I didn't bother doing more. I've read the manuals, I guess, for the furthering levels for CrossFit, and again, it's a little bit dogmatic in terms of like, this is what we think, this is how you do it, nothing else really matters. And it's like, with yourself, you probably would tend to agree. It's like, once you kind of understand, you know, anatomy, once you understand a decent level of physiology, and then once you kind of have a good communication base and understand, you know, potentially some people's standard psychology, not, you know, obviously don't have to be a psychologist, but once you've got those 3 things and you have a good understanding of all of them, you know, the specific stuff on top of that is easy. It's like, now I just have to learn the skills. How do I teach those skills? What are the things I'm looking for anatomically, all right, to make those skills work for that person? But it's like, the issue with CrossFit is it has none of that anatomy, none of that physiology, none of that stuff underneath. So we kind of just get these ideas of archetypes of what certain movements should look like, and we don't understand why they should look like that, or if someone's doesn't exactly look like that, why that might be okay because of their morphology or their makeup, so to speak. So I'd say that's probably where the issue potentially lies, is it's a very, very base level of, these are the movements, this is how you coach them, and that's it. There's nothing else as much underlying of like, oh, if you see this problem, this is why this problem happens. Not, if you see this problem, say it's some knee cave, you cue knees out. But we know for a fact that it might not even be necessary. if you can look at that person and go, oh, that's just, you know, how they move. It's not valgus. That's just them trying to friggin' internally rotate. So I'd say if we're looking at where the education's lacking, I definitely think it's lacking. And I guess a big thing you could look at is when CrossFit first came out, I think the level 1 came out in like early 2000s, late 2000s. We're now in 2023, sorry. And the education hasn't been updated once. So there's been 10 years of change within that sport, maybe more. And let's say the change as well has been huge. So it's like the change when CrossFit first started, it was like you do your strength on a Monday, you do some aerobic piece on the Tuesday, you'll do your strength on the Wednesday, you'll have a rest day on the Thursday, you'll do something other skill piece on the whatever it might be, right? So it's very very polarized, like you said, of you'd have, you know, high stim days, moderate stim days, low stim days, and you kind of rotate through, right? Now it's like you're doing some entry, like some weightlifting skills at the beginning, then you'll do your strength piece and you might do some skills and then you'll do a workout. So that in its sense of how it's programmed is vastly different to when it started, and much, much more complex because you're trying to do so much more in a single session. So there's a much more crossover of skills. There's much more, I guess, spread fatigue. And it's also a whole lot more for that coach to now look at on a day. Whereas like you used to be able to go, oh, I'm doing some squats today with some assault bike at the end. A new coach who doesn't necessarily know the best thing, they can still prepare for that much easier. They go before that class, okay, cool. I've got to maybe look over some squat stuff, understand that a little bit. That's what I'm going into. Then I'm running this, cool. Now it's like, look at the session. Oh, I've got squats, ring muscle ups, workout with 4 different movements and something else. So straight away, that's now much more complex, but the level of coach hasn't kind of brought it up to that level of complexity, or the level of education, I should say. So that's kind of where I think there's been a lot of change in the sport. If you want to call it a sport, whatever we want to say, I call it a sport. There's been so much change over the last, 10, 15 years, but the floor hasn't been brought up to meet the ceiling, so to speak.
Yeah, man. I think what when I listen to that, all I'm hearing from here is like the changes are great, but it's not specifically an issue if you can understand like where that would go in the plan. So like obviously with like I've done a lot of like stuff with obviously Prescript as well. I know like Dennis and I have had lots of conversations around that realm as well. And like looking through the lens of like skill acquisition or that forward thinking model, I think Dennis called it, is like understanding then like that specifics to your plan. So when you look at that cognitive, associative, and autonomous phases of training, you're nodding. So you clearly understand straight away we can go in then and start to look at like, the cognitive phase, how we can build up on the shape of the lift, going into that associative phase, whatever skill-based exercise task specificity would be on the day, and then just drive some autonomous work at the end of the session. But once you understand that, probably then looking at, well, like as we go further and deeper into that session, there's like the ability for the athlete to then be able to stay on top of skill-based movements relative to where they are in their training age. We can then start to sort of break down that model throughout the week, which will keep them safe, even pushing more of the more technical barbell work at the start of the week and phasing that out a little bit by the back end of the week as well. Would that make sense in terms of programming?
Would definitely make sense. All, and that's kind of how I base a lot of the stuff that I program. It's always going to start with something more complex in the day, and then to make it easier, I guess it's going to get dumber across the session, so to speak, because your ability to just output anything of complexity as you get more and more fatigued, it's going to diminish. That rule I do break, and there is definitely a time when you do want to break that rule within CrossFit, but obviously you're going to be very selective with who you break that with, and that just comes down to when we're talking about it being a sport. And when I say it's a sport, that doesn't make everyone who does it an athlete, right? No. It's and that's kind of something I think that gets sort of what's the word, hyped up a lot in terms of like, oh, I do CrossFit, so I'm a CrossFit athlete. Maybe, but is anyone who plays or picks up a football and kicks a ball around each week a football athlete? It's like, no, they just enjoy getting out, working. They enjoy the sport. They enjoy the activity. And that's what I'd say most people fit into that bucket when it comes to CrossFit. But I digressed. When I go back to talking about breaking that rule of complexity, that's when it's going into more sports specific stuff of, okay, Now I need to actually teach this person to be much more aware of what's going on when they're under high levels of fatigue. And that could be something as simple as like, we'll do, some pretty fatiguing stuff, and then they'll go into some high skill work. But I want them to be like, cool, this high skill work, you're going at a huge high intensity, but that is to teach you on the day, or to, I guess, expose you to on the day when you're in competition. You can't just be autonomous. It's like you can't just go with the flow of things. You need to be like, okay, what's that person doing over there? Where are they up to? Do I need to do this? Why did I just fail that rep? What happened? And you need to be on point of being able to be more functional, so to speak, under a high level fatigue, to perform skilled, like high skilled tasks, but also to be aware enough to affect change on those tasks if you need to.
Yeah, that was my thought process. And that's just coming into competition. I guess that's going to be the golden ticket, the end goal, is being able to perform these exercises under serious amounts of fatigue. And I think that's where things get lost. And like you said there, when it comes to athletes, the buzzword, I just think a lot of personal trainers and coaches love to call their clients athletes because it gives them the buzz, not even just in CrossFit as well, but this is my client or my athlete, Sarah, doing it. It's like, okay, let's not call them athletes. I think if you're an athlete, first and foremost, you're probably going to get paid for whatever you're doing, or you're probably definitely, and most probably going to be competing at some level as well. I think the goal is going to be to try and be an athlete, but to understand to get there is going to be, like what you're saying there, skill-based, and understanding then how to push a shit ton of intensity whilst, doing these skill-based exercises and movements under a serious amount of pressure during a competition phase as well. So when we look at the cardiovascular system as well, understanding that like CrossFit has a massive carryover to just how well people compete whilst being gassed out, essentially. Like, and I know through your social media and watching you recently, like you've been doing a lot of stuff talking about the cardiovascular system and all that kind of stuff as well, man. So just maybe dig into a little bit of that as well, like what you see is the importance of the cardiovascular system, how you then test that, and how you then work that into your training as well when it comes to recovery, and more from the performance side as well when it comes to like building up volume and intensity with that as well.
Yeah, 100%. That's like the shit I love. I guess a lot of the ideas around energetic training is through a few people in the States. If people want to dive deeper, a guy named Evan Piker, another guy named Sean Seal. They're very deep into like the physiology side of energetics and bioenergetics, and that's kind of where I've dived a lot into and taken a lot of inspiration off those guys. I still think before anyone dives down the route of energetics and getting very specific with energetics, skill is going to be the first thing that's the most important. And that really just comes down to the response that we have when we start any type of work. And there's a few things that happen, say, when we start doing some assault bike or a handstand push up or a ring muscle up, whatever it might be. And the first thing that happens is obviously we have some increased heart rate, increased blood flow to the working area, which is exercise hyperemia, for those want to know the sciencey stuff. And that's literally just, we have a response happening at a muscle that's working really hard. The blood vessels vasodilate, so we can get a more blood to that area, because more blood means more oxygen. The more oxygen we have, the more energy we can essentially create. Now, while that's happening, there's a couple of other things going on in the background, because if we just had a whole rush of all our blood in our system go to that working muscle, we're probably not going to live for very long, because we obviously need blood flow within our thorax, within our brain, everywhere to keep our body functioning. Now, for this to happen, there's a couple of different processes going on, but one of the main ones is sympathetic vasoconstriction. So our sympathetic nervous system kicks in and it starts to vasoconstrict other blood vessels to areas that aren't necessarily being used. All right, to certain muscles that aren't necessarily being used, and it starts to shunt more blood to the vital organs, the working muscle, so we can kind of keep on the accelerator for a longer period of time, so to speak. Now, obviously, we get to a point where we still hit failure, all right, and that's essentially because there's a few different reasons you can dive into there when it comes to physiology and what's the word? Buildup of metabolites, things like that. But a big thing that does happen is now our body is like, holy shit, that area is trying to take too much blood.
Yeah.
So that sympathetic response now happens at that same muscle group that's trying to draw all that blood, and it starts to vasoconstrict there as well. And that's when we start to get what's called a bit of, starts off with some venous occlusion, which is we can get blood into the muscle, all right, but it's hard to get blood out of the muscle. And then we go to an arterial occlusion. And that's like someone who experiences a really drastic pump that's like, I'm so pumped up, I can't move. It's painful. It's terrible. So I've occluded that muscle and I can't get any more fresh blood there. So that process of sympathetic vasoconstriction into venous occlusion, arterial occlusion, if we don't have that skill down pat, that ultimately is going to happen faster because that your body is like, holy shit, what is going on here? I'm going to have a higher sympathetic response. All right. So I'm going to start doing all sorts of crazy stuff all over the place. So, because I don't have that skill down pat, so it's not going to be as efficient. All right. I'm not shunting blood to areas that need it more. We don't have that skill, because skill is not necessarily just, it's not necessarily just, what's the word? It's not necessarily just like cognitive. It's obviously becomes autonomous. So we start to compensate, do other sorts of weird things. And if we don't have those patterns built, our body's going to compensate. When we compensate enough, we're going to fail. So that's probably the biggest thing when I start is always with the skill, because the skill is going to affect all those physiological processes that cause you to eventually fail on a cardiovascular level. All right. Hopefully I didn't confuse too many people.
Man. Yeah. I think what you're saying there is like, if you're not taking after the cardiovascular system, you're going to get pumped out too quick during high intensity training. So then how do we start to then push cardiovascular training correctly into the program design itself?
First, we've got to find where someone sits on the spectrum of muscle tension, I like to say. So kind of can break it up into a couple of archetypes like I was speaking about at the start. We can have an aerobic posture and aerobic postured athlete. And that's not necessarily saying that this is exactly what's happening and this is exactly what's happening. We can never really say that or draw that conclusion, but we can kind of build these archetypes from a lot of things we see over time. And that'll literally just be as simple as, let's say I get a bodybuilder who comes in, they're going to be really, really good at causing muscle tension, causing occlusion, because occlusion is essentially what's going to be the biggest driver of, or a large driver of mechanical tension for hypertrophy. So that's kind of how they've trained, and that's what's happening there for them. So I can kind of guess straight away when saying that, and most people can. You can look at that person and go, they're going to get pumped out really quick. All right. So how do I now pull them back to being more aerobically postured? And it's usually going to start with a whole damn lot of aerobic training. And that is usually where most people love to skip when it comes to CrossFit, because it's boring as shit.
Yeah.
It's not fun and it's long. It's arduous in terms of the volume is high, like the amount of volume to create large aerobic changes over time does add up to be quite a bit. And then you look at the other spectrum, is that more aerobically postured athlete. It's like, cool, I now need to do things to create more muscle tension. But that kind of falls on the side of like, I need to create more muscle tension, but then it's also, can that person actually express that? Can that person actually express power, express force? So that's a longer process again. And that's where people make the mistake of like, oh, cool, we just need to lift heavy singles, whatever it might be over time. But that person might not even have the musculature to support that. So again, that kind of comes back to a lot of bodybuilding, a lot of hypertrophy work, which for CrossFitters is shit. It's boring. No one likes it because it's not flashy. It's not showy. It's sitting there doing split squats or, tricep extensions, stuff like that, which you don't see programmed much because it's not necessarily part of that ideology of high intensity, varied high intensity training, whatever the speech is for CrossFit. It looks very different. So I guess it's figuring out those archetypes and where someone sits, and then it's now diving into, cool, what's going to be their biggest limitation as an athlete? Is it going to be their skills? Is it going to be their cardiovascular system? Is it going to be their strength? Is it going to be this, that? And once you kind of have figured those out, we're going to bias that thing, but we're not going to stop training everything else. It's like, we're going to bias that limiter or that limitation, that rate limiting factor that we've discovered, but we still need to train the system holistically. We still need to get everything else in somehow. It's just going to be a little bit more micro dose all over the place while we really focus on this one thing.
So how often across the week could that look? Would that be saying to train more on like these low intensity areas, like zone 2, for example? Could we then start to put more low intensity training? Like, I don't know, like what kind of modalities within a CrossFit environment anyway, could we see cardiovascular work be becoming a thing? And for how long and for how much duration across the week could we be looking at?
So I'd say one to start with is like zone 2 training. It is great. And that's probably what I'd say 90% of CrossFitters are going to have huge or yield huge results from just doing that.
Yeah.
And I'd probably say I'm very biased towards something like a bike erg to achieve that. And it comes back to, we got an assault bike, we got a ski erg, we got a rower, we got a bike erg. That's probably usually it. And then we also got running. Now, like we just said before, training exists on like a spectrum of like complex to stupid, right? And so do those four pieces of equipment. It's like we've got a row, we've got an assault bike. Yes, they're both quite dumb in terms of, I probably wouldn't say a row is that dumb, but an assault bike's probably, you get on it, everyone can kind of figure it out. Same with a rower to an extent with a little bit of cueing. However, the physiological processes that are happening there are more complex. It's like now we're trying to shunt blood to 2 different areas of the body so it can continuously contract and continuously work. And we know that, I think it's something like once the arms start moving, that pulls like 30% or 40% of blood away from the legs. So now the legs can't work as hard. And now your body's stuck between this fight of cardiovascular control to figure out what it's doing. So that's why using something like a bike is far simpler to try and just push that energetic adaptation of zone 2, all the things that come along with zone 2, whether it's, you want to go into like mitochondrial density or all that kind of stuff. It's going to be much more efficient on a bike, on just a single bike erg than anything else. And then you can kind of look at your roller and your assault bike and other things like that. That's a skill that I also need to do. So I'm not going to completely neglect that, but those things will be micro dosed throughout the week. Whereas my main modality for my zone 2 training is going to be on the bike erg. So that's kind of how I like to look at that. When it comes to duration, of how often, how long, it's always going to be dependent on how much else that person needs to work on. That's also a very difficult thing. But it's also going to look like when we take an athlete, so to speak, we're going to have an off season and an on season. And that's probably something that a lot of people don't look at in CrossFit. I know a few coaches and a few training places that and a few companies that are very good, but a lot don't look at it as an off season or on season, which I think is probably a massive overlook or oversight on their behalf, because it's like, what does every other sport have? And it's like, yes, CrossFit's a new sport, but 90% of things have been done before. It's now taking what they've done and applying it in this sense. And an off season makes complete sense because we know exactly when our competition is. We know exactly when our competition year is, when it starts, when it ends, and the structure of it. So obviously in the back end or after competition in our off season, we can now work on, the lowest hanging fruit of adaptation, or the ones that are also going to take the longest. So those, long aerobic, slow adaptations, we can draw those out for a long period of time, and we can probably start to, not forget, but remove a bit of stuff for now, because we still have a huge on season to rebuild those skills or re-expose those skills that we need to hit. And again, there's also that psychological factor of probably don't want to completely remove this thing, because now that person's probably going to believe they've lost it, even though they might not have. And that's going to have an effect also. So back to, I guess, your question of how often, it's always going to look much, much more in that off season to bias those things. And that could be anywhere from 3 sessions a week to 4 sessions a week, depending on what that thing is. For something like aerobic training or zone 2 training, it's pretty easy to add in a large amount of it without too much carryover fatigue, depending on the athlete you're giving it to. And that can also look, that'll obviously look a little bit different depending if it's on the other side of the spectrum with strength work. But for aerobic work, we can get away with doing a lot of it. And, you could put that in, you could microdose it in warm-ups, cool downs, things like that to make it a little bit easier to spread the volume out over the week. Doesn't necessarily have to be, an hour session on the bike, 4 days a week, but you can still, create a large amount of volume over a 6-month period. If that person's doing 10-minute aerobic piece on the bike warm up and a 15-minute cool down on the aerobic piece on the bike. That's, 5 days a week with 25-minute extra zone 2 work over, a 6-month period. And that will make a difference over time. The biggest thing with zone 2 work as well is it's fucking slow. Like, people forget, it's like keep the slows slow and the highs high, but for some reason everyone likes to keep the slows high. So it's also being able to, lock that person in of, this is slow work. Like, yes, you should feel like you're doing fuck all and there's nothing wrong with that, because that's where the sweet spot is for that, what we're trying to get.
Yeah, man. Like, I get some of my clients I bought the Echo bike a couple months ago and I'm loving that thing, and I'll be
brutal.
Yeah. But I mean, even then it's still easy if you go easy. Like, I go on it for 10 minutes at the start of my session. I'll hit that thing up about 2 to 3, maybe 4 times a week for like 15, 20 minutes, just whenever I find time. Living in a gym makes it easy for me to just be like, cool, I'm going to do 15 minutes on the bike here. I was using the rowing machine for a long time and I was like doing about an hour at a time, but it really started to play. It fucked up my hip essentially. And I was just, including like with the squats and stuff, something had to leave. So I got this bike in, but I've noticed with the bike, you'll ask a client to come in and warm up and they're hitting that thing and they're getting their legs all juicy. And I'm like, man, just back off. Just back. They're like, oh, this thing kills you. It destroys you. But it's like, well, it's the bike. It's the assault bike. Like, it's going to be as hard as you make it. So I always tell them, like, and what I do for myself is like, if you don't have like a heart monitor on, if you don't know where your zone 2 lies is, I want you to go on the bike, but I want you to be able to hold a 10-minute conversation with me at the same time. Just want you to be able to talk to me. You're not going to be out of breath. And that's going to be a good place to stay. Lo and behold, they're like, oh, that's easy. Like, I could stay there for an hour. Yeah, you could stay there for an hour. And that's kind of where I see things being. And that low intensity, steady state really then has a massive carryover as well to like your recovery. So right now, training to do, I'm not a big runner, but I'm going to be doing a half marathon to start in, I think it's May in Edinburgh. Then I want to do the Berlin Marathon in September. And it's like, I'm finding that less time running and actually more time just sitting on the bike and just working on that zone 2 works, having a huge carryover to when I actually do go out running. And so it doesn't, I find like when it comes to cardiovascular training, and what I'm starting to see more for myself, at least anyway, is it's not so much about time spent in one specific area. It's just time spent doing more time in a zone 2 area. And what you're saying there, which I didn't think about before, was splitting up those, the body parts between the legs and the arms as well. Would it be safe to say then that sometimes on the assault bike, if that's all you have in the gym, and I know there's like quite a lot of people in that situation, we don't have all of these different modalities of cardiovascular equipment, could you just sit on the assault bike and then just use your legs and just not have your hands on the handles? Would that be another way to look at it?
Yeah, of course. And what I say, like the effect there of the, the bike or the, let's say, the assault bike compared to the bike erg, it's like, is the difference there going to be huge in terms of like the adaptation you're going to get? It's probably not going to be massive. It's just a consideration to think about. So especially, if you're doing something like running and running is your goal, I'd say an assault bike's a great tool to supplement it with, because, you've got that reciprocation, right? You got that little bit of rotation of the rib cage. All right. It's not just like this fixed plane, all right, of you sitting there on a bike, whatever it might be. So something like running and an assault bike polarizes quite well together, in my opinion. And so yeah, I wouldn't say there's a best way or there's non-best way. This is just kind of the little things to think about when you're treating it like a sport. And you're really trying to, I know everyone's against the word at the moment, but you're trying to optimize training. And I think optimizing training is actually a really fucking important thing for someone who is a high level CrossFit athlete, because there is so many fucking things you can place into a week of training. And that person's spending 4 hours of hard work a day within that week. You better believe those things in there must be there for a reason. All right. You shouldn't just be getting given shit because it's something to do or because it looks like a cool combination. It's like, no, the reason you're doing all those dumbbell snatches in those workouts is because I've seen a trend over the last 5 years of, the CrossFit Open workouts or the games workouts, whatever it might be, where that movement's being used. So we might need to hit that more. Or you suck at that movement under fatigue. So guess what? We're going to be doing it under fatigue. Or you need to do this certain skill, whatever it might be. It's like your time is finite for the amount of things you need to work on. So being a little bit more optimal in terms of exercise selection is probably, a pretty important thing when it comes to CrossFit. When it comes to like your intensity prescriptions, things like that, RPE, RIR, all those things, are they optimal when it comes to tracking? yes and no. Depends on how you track those things. Would the optimal crowd look at it as optimal? Maybe not, because it goes against like, oh, it's not fixed. You can't track it. You can't sort of look at trends over time, whatever it is, like percentages. But again, the same thing. The sport has a billion different inputs. You have to mitigate fatigue somehow. And that's not, and as we know, that's not also including, that person has a job, they have kids, they've got this, they got that, so the same arguments as everyone that uses RP or RIR.
That goes straight back to like what you were talking about before, though. When you look at optimization, like I think that needs to be a necessity in most things as well, but understanding like how you could regulate that. And for me, like the idea of using percentages within a CrossFit realm where you're training maybe 5-6 days a week, sometimes twice a day, seems completely like arbitrary. It's just that it doesn't seem to have a place. But that auto regulation, which would probably tie more into like RIR and stuff like that, is going to be a safer place to stay for the long term. And how you feel on that given day going into that program, you just based out for your current like recovery levels, and then you can push and pull as hard as you need to. But like exactly. I see like, what you talked about at the start as well, like you just want to beat yourself up at the start. You just go in because CrossFit's very much like who can work the hardest, who's got the biggest sweat on, who's lying on the floor at the end, and basically who puked at the end of the day, they're the daddy, you know what I'm saying? But it's kind of like, how do we then start to like pull ourselves away from this idea that CrossFit's there to fuck you up? Because that's not sport in its own realm. So when you see CrossFit is a sport, it's a sport. Like there's too many skill-based things going on within that one realm to say that it's not, in my opinion. But then if we're like seeing these coaches that are like glorifying and gratifying themselves on just how hard they've pushed their clients or how hard they've pushed their community, then it's kind of pulling away from the idea that this is a sport. And it's now just this thing that, we're using for like almost self-gratification. Like we're the hardest working CrossFit box because all our guys are fucked at the end of the session. But if you're looking to have these guys train twice a day, 5-6 days a week, then that seems to me like it's a completely pointless spectrum to be living in for a long time anyway, because you then just kind of building way too much frequency and intensity. Maybe you could look at that as like the Bulgarian setup for like powerlifting. Like it was just too high, too often, too much. 2% of the guys got through to whatever competition, the rest of them died out in the background. So I just feel like that there's that balance point there as well of understanding, well, good coaches optimization is going to be understanding exactly what you've been talking about in terms of how you strategize programs and then push them forward with the right recovery modalities as well. That isn't my idea, is like being an athlete. And something that I see wrong here all the time, especially in Glasgow, is just like there's boxes here that just punish their guys. And if they're not on the floor sweating, crying, dying, then they didn't work hard enough. And it teaches them bad habits, just like bad habits around eating, binge eating and just glorifying these heavy eating days at the end of a cut and stuff. It's like, let's just think about things clearly and how can we start to like push those responses in a better direction, essentially. So I loved all like how that came back to what you said at the start,
Yeah. And it's I was that person that was like, I need to fucking bust my ass every day and feel like shit and feel like I've worked to have, I don't know, some sort of worth at that moment. And that was just that wasn't necessarily just CrossFit that built that. Obviously, when I came from the military side of things as well, that definitely added to it. But yeah, I was at a point where like, I would miss like a day of training and like, I would be like, okay, cool. I haven't like, done enough work or gone hard enough to, have this amount of food or something like that. And that's just an example. Or I would literally just feel like a piece of shit because I hadn't got in and worked really hard because of this environment that was built up around me of this, you need to bust your ass every day. You need to work hard. That's how you achieve your goals. That's how you look like fucking Rich Froning. And, that's how you do all these things. And that was it was a really bad relationship that I built with training. And it got to a point where it was literally like an addiction. It wasn't like, I wasn't even enjoying what I was doing. I didn't even know why the fuck I was doing it. I was just doing it because that's what I had done and it's what I felt like I had to do. And then it kind of got to a point where finally I said, fuck this. I was like, what am I doing? And it was then that's when I kind of went down the route of like, there has to be a better way. This can't be right. Like, why would it be, this is the only kind of sport, I guess, that pushes this? Why does every single other sport in the world have, in seasons and off seasons and push, progressed programs and things like that? Why is not everyone just going off some arbitrary numbered program online that they've received to work with, to peak for the open or whatever that's 12 months around the year working your ass off? So that's kind of where I started to ask those questions of like, hang on, something can't be right here if I'm feeling this way about this. And that can't be the best way to go about it if this is the only, I guess, sport that was in my, in my atmosphere at the time, that I could see this trend, not just in myself, but other people around me. So that's kind of when I started asking those questions and going, is there a better way to do this? And is there other people doing it in a better way? And that's kind of how I go off with everything I do with CrossFit now. Is it's much more like CrossFit is young, like I said earlier, and a million lessons have been learned before it through other sports. So instead of necessarily looking into the young sport, look at all the other sports around and outside where all these mistakes have already been made, and look at the ones that you can apply, and then get rid of the ones that you can't apply. And that's kind of how you formulate your ideas, obviously still with the principles and the basics of the skills and whatever you might need to know, but it's all been done. It's just what's applicable, what's not applicable, and then how do you make that work?
Yeah, man, absolutely love that. There's the one like sort of indirect relationship I do see with the great CrossFit is like the extremities of CrossFit and the extremities of bodybuilding. And I'm seeing a lot of, in the UK at least, like a lot of bodybuilders hitting up CrossFit at some point in their career, whether that's they're just bored, done in with the same exercises, the same routines. But there's this like sort of intensity around both of them, these extremities within both different realms. I don't see many powerlifters going, you know what, I'm done with the squat, bench, and deadlift. I'm going to go and hit up CrossFit now, and I'm going to go and hit up bodybuilding. There's this like now functional training thing within Scotland, which is almost like borderline. It's almost CrossFit, but it's not CrossFit, but you're getting a sweat on and you're doing more variability within the sport itself. And it seems to be like, well, bodybuilding's not very variable in its own measure. CrossFit or functional training, if you want to call it that, is very variable, but they both have these direct intensifications that are in it, and these direct kind of like, how would you class it, like almost like addictive natures to training, because it's do you see what I'm saying? Do you find that as well a lot with what you're doing? Do you see a lot of like that crossover between the two?
I definitely probably see that they're both more on like this side of extreme, and maybe that's because that's what I follow more, but I'd say like bodybuilding and CrossFit are both very like culty, I guess. So to speak, in like their following. And, you know, that was like, I guess I had my first few powerlifting experiences going to nationals with Dennis and meeting them and seeing how they even communicate with each other. I was shocked. I was like, holy shit, this is unreal. Like as a CrossFitter at the time or earlier, I'd always think that, oh, these guys are going to be like super dogmatic and like, they're all going to be like, you know, staring each other down in like the back room and whatever it might be. But it was literally like, even more friendly than CrossFit in terms of like how welcoming everyone was. And yeah, I don't really know what breeds that. I'm not too sure, but you know, I had the other experience, like competing in CrossFit. You go to a warm-up area and everyone's just headphones in, like staring at each other. Like it's this weird, like toxic environment, at least the ones that I've been in. Some are great, don't get me wrong. Like this is just taking the bad ones out of the good. You know, for every one bad one, there's probably 10 good ones, right? But when it comes to like I guess the polarization between the two, with CrossFit and bodybuilding and how they're kind of like very similar in terms of like work ethic, maybe it's the relationship around like, you know, I need to do more to get better. You know, volume. Like I see that seen pretty highly in bodybuilding from people I've worked with and people that have come to me from bodybuilding programs that I've seen. It's very like high volume, high intensity, work hard all the time. This weird culture around like, you know, go to the fucking gym. If you miss the gym, you're a piece of shit, all this kind of stuff. Whereas like powerlifting, for example, it's like, fuck yeah, I deadlifted heavy today. I'm going to go have a pizza. You know what I mean? Like, so I guess it's probably maybe CrossFit and bodybuilding are both on that side of the spectrum of when it comes to, I guess, unhealthy relationships with training potentially. And I think a lot of that also comes down to vanity, because CrossFit indirectly, directly, yes, it's the sport of fitness and getting as fit as possible. But when you're in a gym where everyone's in booty shorts and crop tops and every guy's running around with his shirt off with a 12 pack, like vanity definitely comes into play there, and how you look and how you feel. And, you know, every single person at the CrossFit Games is fucking stage ready, like they're diced. So I think that also comes into play as well, of like, you know, how you perceive yourself and how you perceive other people and how people should look, or how you should look as well.
Love that, man. Because the people I don't see throwing shade at CrossFit are the powerlifters. But what I do see is a lot of shade being thrown from the bodybuilders, or the, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
you know, the geeks online, like, oh, why are you doing a lateral jump over a rower to do a burpee or a barbell when you're under 50?
Yeah.
I get it. It's like, okay, I get it. But it's like, you just said it there. It's like, there's almost like this jealousy, like, well, we've been told for so long that I need to do this to look this way, but there's this other camp doing it like that, and they look just equally, if not better as well, and they have better gas tanks. So maybe it's just that jealousy in itself. So some people are going to stay at that end and just try and do what they're doing, and some people are just going to join that camp. Does that work for me as well? Like subconsciously almost, you know?
Yeah, and it's that there's always going to, you know, people, and that's kind of one thing that I love working with Aiden and Dennis is like, I'm exposed to so much more. I'm not stuck with my blinders on and like CrossFit is the answer. You know, that's why now I'm like, holy shit, like how the fuck is this powerlifter so strong? Like, what is he doing? Can I apply anything from that?
And he's fit.
Yeah.
Dennis is fit as well, man.
Yeah. And it's like, how are these weightlifters, you know, that I'm seeing are so good at this movement? Is there things I can apply from there? And it's like, it all fits. And that's the thing about CrossFit, is it's like, you're trying to do so damn much. A lot can fit in there. Again, it's still, I'd probably say primarily it's an aerobic sport. But, you know, taking all these other methods from elsewhere, how do they fit? How can they fit? And the same with bodybuilding. It's like, I don't know why, but I think it started with the whole functional bodybuilding shit. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's like, whatever the fuck. It's like bodybuilding with like kettlebells and stuff. And because kettlebells are functional. It created some weird thing that shouldn't exist, because it's like, what's not functional about bodybuilding in terms of the movements? You know, I'm doing a bicep curl. That is the, you know, the action of that fucking muscle. So there's so much to pull from bodybuilding that can work perfectly with CrossFit. You know, the amount of like stress those guys can push to, you know, the amount of discomfort that they can actually reach. Like, you know, if you've worked with like proper, or you've seen like what good bodybuilders do in the gym, they fucking know how to work. So that's definitely something that, you know, CrossFitters can take, and, you know, maybe doing an aerobic session here and there for a bodybuilder, that might be something they can take. So, you know, they can walk up a set of stairs and not be gassed, and you're not going to lose your gains. Like, we know this. So I think it's just, we got to learn from each other. And that's just something that I think that is never going to be an easy task when we have people that just enjoy the conflict, enjoy the, you know, two sides against each other going, fuck you, I'm better, and fuck you, I'm better. I was like, who gives a shit?
Well, that's the world that we live in now. What's called piggybacking. We can just, you know, pull someone's stuff up and say why it's wrong. It's going to get some likes and give you some kind of clout in the industry. But what I like about you guys at ROBUR is like different modalities. You know, weightlifting, powerlifting, you know, CrossFit, and between yourself, Dennis, and Mudge. And it's just nice to see, man. And we've seen a few other excellent online presences right now that are doing the same stuff, that are kind of changing the industry. And it's, I think you know who I'm talking about. And it's the same idea. And there needs to be more of that, I feel. And I think more conversations around like why these things work and how they work, and get into the science behind it, so people can stop being so pigeonholed into one space, and then start to like understand, well, how can they, because that's all I do. Like, I have no specific, I don't say I'm this or that, but I take what I learn, and I take what I apply in my own training, and then I build my own system around that. So like, how am I able to take all these different methodologies, take small bits from each, and build my own sort of basis of training, and my own basis of like, what does 4 pillars look like when someone comes through the door? How does my setup look? How does my assessment look? And then how does that program design look over the first 12 months? And I need that to be different to what other stuff is out there, because I'm trying to run a business, and I need there to be results behind that as well. So for me to be able to like understand CrossFit, because I have clients that come in and they come from CrossFit, or they still want to have like, or they get 8 months in, they're like, man, I'm really watching this CrossFit now. I'd like to understand a little bit more about what we can do. Can you program some of this stuff? So for me, it's like, well, I better understand what is CrossFit as a whole? And then what can I take from that to put it into my own clients' programs themselves? So like having these conversations are so powerful, man. I really appreciate that. And I'd like to get you back on for a second round because there's another 10 questions that I have at least lined up for you. And kind of ran out of time now, dude. So we'll get you back on for a part 2 as well. But
I'm down.
Thanks for coming on today, dude. So like probably just to finish off, man, anyone new coming into CrossFit, just sort of a couple small key ingredients that you would say to prioritize for them, and just quickly so that they can like have an idea of where to start, maybe people they can follow online, that kind of stuff as well, including yourself.
Yeah. So I guess where to start is find a good gym. You know, as I said at the start, having someone there that can actually take you through things is always going to be the best case scenario. If you've never touched it before, you know, how do I pick up a barbell? You know, what is this rig thing? Like someone who can actually take you through everything and give you a really good explanation. So finding a good gym, I think, is always going to be the best thing there. Understand that you're going to see a crazy amount of results really, really fast. All right. I don't look at that as a negative. That's awesome. It's a positive, but understand that that's going to happen, but it's also going to stop. And when that does slow down, that doesn't necessarily mean turn the dial up. All right. Whereas that's what we always think. We always think that, oh, my progress has slowed down, so now I need to dial up the intensity, dial up the volume, because mustn't be working hard enough. It's like step back and actually look, are you working hard enough? Are you working too much? Understand those things. Talk to the people around you. Talk to the coach. All right. Hopefully there's a good coach at the gym you're at. Understand why that might be going on. They might be going, okay, cool. You've been doing this for 3 years now. All right. You're probably at a level where things are going to slow down and going to take a little bit longer for you to progress. All right. Maybe you've been doing, you know, AM and PM classes. You also have a job, a partner, kids, you know, all the other things going on. Maybe your stress levels are high and you actually need to back off a little bit more. So I guess that's probably my couple to begin with would be find a good place, a good gym that you can go to. Understand that, you know, you're going to get a lot of gains at the start, but they are going to slow down, and that's okay. And that's completely normal. And then the other thing is, if you're not doing it as a sport, for like an athletic endeavor, don't treat it as one. Treat it as what it is. Treat it as that little bit of fun, right? That little bit of, you know, extra like work or conditioning or whatever it might be, or a little bit of whether it's a activity for you to go hang out with people. It's a social event. Treat it as those things. Don't try and be tier 2 me if your goal is not to be tier 2 me.
Got you.
Right? Because it's like, what's the point? You're going to spend 4 hours a day in the gym for the next 10 years to not be tier 2 me. And now you've just spent 10 years in the gym. You know, you could have spent 2 hours in the gym a day, less, an hour in the gym a day, and done a whole lot of things outside and enjoyed your life and use your fitness outside, go ride a bike, do all those other things. Don't spend your time trying to be an athlete if you're actually not trying to be an athlete.
Love it. Cheers, man.
Yeah.
That's it, dude. Thank you so much for coming on today, man. And I'll have you back on again at some point, and we'll go through the second part of this conversation, dude. So
appreciate it, man.
Where can we find you? Instagram, all that usual stuff. I'll put it in the Spotify link anyway, but from your own self, where can we find you?
On Instagram, Lewi_Holcombe, HOLCOMBE. And you can find us at ROBUR Performance on Instagram, where you find Dennis and Aiden as well. But appreciate you having me on, man. Like it's always good to chat. And, you know, I know I've always had good conversations with yourself. So I really appreciate you having me on, man, and letting me talk CrossFit. And for those listening, if they thought that I was bashing CrossFit the whole time, I actually love the sport. I'm just very passionate about where I think it needs to go, I guess.
And that's why I got you on, man. They're just like these conversations. So thank you so much, and we'll get you back. Lewi, it was a pleasure, mate. And I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.